Okay, thank you. And I think, Mark, you are putting up the
Yep.
things.
Hopefully everyone can
Yep,
see it.
I see it anyway.
Good.
So this particular cover, well, in fact, let me say, my purpose is not only to just show you fun things that I collect, but to give you ideas, but it is also to encourage you to look at some of the things that you have and find out that there's much more of a story to them. As John Hotchner has said, is it's on there that we take our collection seriously, but it should be fun. And in fact, of course, we say it's fun. Even exhibiting is something that is fun, and lots of things that you will see have made exhibits. Some of them what I call serious exhibits, and some of them are fun exhibits. Uh, this particular cover I bought many years ago. I saw it, it intrigued me. On Sunday, I had $25, $30 left, and I figured, oh, I'm going to buy it. And I ended up finding a exhibit to put it into. But it clearly is fun, and the fishing boy and this fish and the dog are cut out of Egyptian stamps. And I will show you the last slide will actually show how I've done that into my exhibit. So next cover or next slide. These are a few of my favorite things. This particular, well, my favorite thing of it was something that has been in two stamp shows because two clubs have done little exhibits for their exhibitors of, or excuse me, for their members as favorite things. But my favorite things you will see appearing later on. I have limited my worldwide collection down to something in each continent, and you see those uh, continents there, some of which are serious collections. Some of them were, hey, Mozambique Company. We loved those things as a kid, those colorful stamps and African animals. And I'm trying to do a serious exhibit. It's not easy because, gee, lots of people I think have decided to do what I've done. Okay, next. Stamp shapes. Stamp shapes are something that are very catchy, but are not something that I have seen exhibited very often, although my exhibit of stamp shapes once got a popular choice. The cover down on the bottom on the left of Nicaragua is one that, again, I just bought. How could you turn that down? Um, it is a very catchy cover, but I don't imagine that it would be one that would gain lots of notoriety among the judges if it were an exhibit. But stamp shapes, we have lots of stamp shapes. Actually, there are several listed, but since that page was done, Thailand has come up with a seven-sided stamp. So we now have the five for the pentagon, the six, the hexagon, the septagon for seven, and octagon. And then there are all sorts of uh, stamps that have curves in them, stamps that have curves and lines together. And then there are the sort of cutout stamps, the freeform stamps at the bottom as in the Samoa cover. Okay, next. One interesting thing I do is I collect February 29th covers. And in fact, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, there was a great article in the APS Journal of February 29th covers. So there are three of those on there. The top one is the USS Umpqua. Well, I went to high school. In fact, I went to school in Roseburg, Oregon, which is on the Umpqua River. So, you know, it was something that I had to have, but I have it for two reasons. One, of course, it's my hometown river, and then two, it's a February 29th. On the other side are three covers that when you have nothing to do at a stamp show and you've looked at everything and you're basically out of money, so you're down to the um, two covers for $1 type thing, you can look through them. And I haven't got enough yet, but all of these are Friday the 13th covers. And so, something challenging to do. And it keeps me interested for that last 2 hours of the show when I found everything else and I can look at it and I can go through the box of covers. Okay, next. These three covers are adventures in being delivered. The first one actually is a postcard collection to foreign destinations, but it was the U.S. postcard sent to the American consulate of Inini, South America, and returned to sender with no city, state, or country name. Well, for stamp collectors, or for stamp collectors who know their geography, the country name is right there. It's Inini. Inini is actually let's say, the southern part or the jungle part of French Guiana. And post office never managed to deliver it. The cover on the other side, on the top, was sent to me, and you will see a hand cancel on it. Well, unless you really know it, you're not going to know what happened to this, but I did. It was mailed by a friend who lived a block and a half from me, and it was canceled by the mailman and delivered en route, so it never made it to the post office. And that doesn't happen very often, but it is permissible, or at least it was permissible by USPS rules. The bottom cover was also sent to a friend of mine, George Brown, who, well, it was addressed to 215 Peugeot Avenue, Medford, Oregon. There is no Peugeot Avenue in Medford, Oregon. But the cover was delivered the next day anyway, because somebody in the post office figured that, oh, I'll bet it's going to 215 Renault Avenue. So it was delivered to 215 Renault Avenue. Next. This is another cover that I bought at the end of a show because I had a little money left. I didn't know what to do with. I still had the idea for an exhibit to put it in, but absolutely fantastic cover. It was sent from Paris in 1939 to Granger, Michigan. Well, there is no Granger, Michigan. So in Detroit, it was directed to Granger, Minnesota. Got to Granger, Minnesota. The addressee was not known, so they put it on the train directly south, and it went to Granger, Iowa, where it arrived. Well, that person wasn't in Granger, Iowa, so they put it back on the next day on the same train, and it went south to Granger, Missouri. Person wasn't there either, and so you see that they said try Washington in Missouri, so they sent it off to Granger, Washington. Well, there is no Granger, there is a Granger, Washington, but there is no person there they sent it to. So they crossed that out and said, try Indiana. And apparently it worked because there are no more marks on it. Although, as you can see, by the time it did all these travels, it was well tattered and had to be put back together by the post office. As it turns out, Granger, Indiana is about 2 miles south of the Michigan border. And I can sort of imagine people visiting to people in France, and they said, you need to write us. We live in Granger, Indiana. It's really close to Michigan. And it was the Michigan that stuck in the people's mind. Well, I never thought I would find another cover like this that went from city to city to city. But the next cover shows that I did. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. quiz about Granger. Let's go back to the next thing, Mark. There are 17 Grangers in the United States. 3 of them are named after a man named Granger. 2 of them are named after the Grange. 1 of them has a water tower that is labeled hot, and the other one is labeled cold. 1 of the Grangers has dinosaurs throughout the town, particularly in one park. 1 of the Grangers has an elephant cemetery where a circus wintered, and sometimes the elephant did not survive. 1 of them has at least a locally well-known brew pub. The one with the hot and cold towers is Granger, Iowa. The one with the dinosaurs is Granger, Washington, although no dinosaur bones have been discovered in the state of Washington, although I think near Bellingham, they suspect maybe there was Granger, or was elephant, I'm off, dinosaurs. The cemetery was also in Iowa, so Granger, Iowa. Okay, the next one, another cover that went from city to city. Belfast, mailed from Mexico, sent to Belfast, the United States, and it arrived in New York, where there was a Belfast, which was named after Belfast, India, and it was Seneca Indian Territory, but it was not where the Musgrave and Company Limited was. So they forwarded it to Belfast, Pennsylvania. Well, Pennsylvania is not the right place, so they forwarded it to Belfast, Maine. Belfast, Maine is an interesting story, also Indian Territory, and it was, anyway, if you can read that, but interesting things happened in Belfast. Well, we ran out of Belfast, so in Belfast, Maine, they decided to try Bellefontaine, Ohio, which is the highest point in Ohio, which has the first concrete street in the United States, 1891. It also has the world's shortest street, which the picture in there is of the world's shortest street. And of course, we stamp collectors know that there's maybe another Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, but it never went there. They suggested, however, in Bellefontaine, Ohio, to try Ireland. And I don't know if it ever went because it didn't have international postage on it. But anyway, that's the end of the story of that one. Next. This is from a dealer who knew I collected unusual covers. And so he sold me this one. And it was mailed to an APO directory to a Korean outfit in Uijeonbu. Well, the Army or Navy, Army, tried various post offices and could never find who this person was, or could never find out where the person went. And so eventually they just gave up and marked it returned back to sender. Well, they didn't find it because it doesn't exist. Uijeonbu is a place, but it is a place in actually my favorite television show, a comedy series. So next one, Mark. Uijeonbu is the place where a lot of the episodes of MASH happened. And okay, say it's one of my favorite television shows, but you can collect things to go with your favorite things. So I have this Jamie Farr, who was Klinger in MASH, classic, cancel. And then Jamie Farr was from Toledo, Ohio. Toledo, Ohio, he talked about quite often, particularly their baseball team. And if you go back to the list of favorite things, baseball is one of my favorite things. So the Toledo Mud Hens, actually those two pictures were taken by me because one time traveling back east, I made a detour with friends so that we could go to the baseball field at Toledo, Ohio, which is the third field, the fifth field that was on 3rd Street, and saw the mascot, the Toledo Mud Hens. Okay, next. Baseball, of course, is something that is of interest to a lot of people. The Field of Dreams is in Iowa, and I have a connection to Iowa as well as the Field of Dreams. But the picture was taken on the same trip when we were at the Field of Dreams. Cancel of the Field of Dreams. I am working on an exhibit called, or will be called, the First Philatelic All-Star Game, where I am going to use stamps to show what went on in the first baseball game. Of course, one of the things you have to have in there is the 7th inning stretch. So there's Harry Carey of the Cubs, who is singing or who leads people in singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" in the 7th inning stretch. And then the postcard down in the corner is from Tuba City, Arizona. Well, I have a fantasy baseball team, Stratomatic Baseball, and my team is the Tuba City Band. And of course, there is a Tuba City where I have been, but I also found this cover, or postcard cover from Tuba City. And then you have Roberto Clemente, who is my favorite baseball player. Next. Well, you can show basically various episodes from your life on stamps. I figure everybody needs to have a penny black, but I wasn't going to get just any penny black. I wanted a penny black that had my initials in the lower corner. So my penny black, and I had a dealer who helped me find one, L in one corner and C in the other, so Larry Crain. A cover, actually a local cover, that was mailed on my birthday, not the year I was born, but at least it was mailed on my birthday, of interest because the date, October 17th, is upside down. I was actually born in La Junta, Colorado, so the bottom cover there is the railroad post office, Kansas City to La Junta, Colorado. But what is particularly of interest to that is it is addressed to Ivor Rathbun, Uncle Ivor. So even before I was born, my La Junta cover is something that relates to my family. And then the two covers on the other side, I have two children and the names of them are Quentin. So I have a Quentin, San Quentin, French cover, and Vail, South Dakota, although there is also a Vail in Oregon. Okay, next. Postcard. Postcards are something very collectible now by stamp collectors and exhibitable, but that is my high school in Roseburg. That's actually about 3 blocks from the Umpqua River. I went to college in Iowa, and that is a postcard of the dorm where I lived for 4 years, the Quadrangle, which is no longer there. It was torn down 2 years ago, and I was there the year before it was torn down. I was in the Peace Corps, and so there's a cover of the Peace Corps. And then my second university was the University of Oregon. Interesting cover there because when Oregon went to the Rose Bowl, they prepared this cancel to show they were in the Rose Bowl, and it had Donald Duck on it, which they have been licensed, or they've received a license from the Disney Corporation to show Donald Duck memorabilia, but it didn't include postmarks. So they then wrote and requested from Disney to be able to use the postmark. Well, the cancel wasn't approved, or they didn't receive permission then from Disney until after the Rose Bowl itself was played. So all the covers there are with the cancel, but they have to have a different cancel on there because of the later date. Okay, next one. These are a series of covers which have a story behind each one of them. And the first one is an early Peace Corps cover. Actually, it is from a Peace Corps volunteer who was in the Peace Corps before I was. And I actually applied for the Peace Corps before Kennedy's assassination. So I was a fairly early volunteer. This one is North Borneo, and it was sent by Gail Kincaid. On the back, we have her return address from the state of Washington. She was a nurse in a thing in Sabah, in North Borneo, in what is now the Sabah province of Malaysia. And among other things, within about the first 6 months on the job, she was in an isolated village, and I really mean isolated, where and I found all this through search on the internet. But a man in her town was gored by an elephant, and she accompanied him downriver to the nearest hospital. This letter itself, I'm going to assume, was written at her site, and its travel was brought by canoe, probably down the river to a town where it was then put on a trucker to carry to the next town, where it was then transferred to a bus where it was delivered to where it was postmarked, which was where the airport was out of the country. Okay, next. This is a dealer at PIPEX, as a matter of fact, who, when I asked, do you have any covers that have a story behind them? He said, sure. I would have probably never figured this one out, but this particular cover relates to Marquette University, to Ripley's Believe It or Not, but you will see it is actually originating in Latvia and was sent to Walter Bundras. Well, Walter Bundras played for Marquette University basketball, and he was listed in Ripley's Believe It or Not because in a game against Grinnell College in Iowa, he scored 9 points in the first 55 seconds of the ball game. And this was before the three-point shot. But later on, Walter Bundras became the coach of the Lithuanian national basketball team. They won the European Championship in 1939 and were one of the favorites for the 1940 Tokyo Olympics, except, of course, because of World War II, the Tokyo Olympics were canceled. Okay, next. This is a cover with an Oregon story, even though it is mailed from Cleveland, Ohio to Pasadena, California. And it looks like just a regular old cover, double weight, 1924. Although the handwritten thing on there does say speech seconding nomination, Coolidge for president. So next slide. It turns out that Charles Carey actually did second the nomination for Calvin Coolidge. And in fact, in this cover is one of those purple carbon copies of his seconding speech, although it has corrections on it or changes to it anyway. So Charles Carey, an Oregon delegate to the Republican convention in Cleveland, Ohio, where they stayed in the Hotel Cleveland, was given the honor, and Oregon was given the honor of nominating Calvin Coolidge for president in 1924. Why Oregon? Well, the story really is very convoluted. It seems that in the Republican convention in 1920 in Chicago, the political bosses of the Republican Party, who were mostly senators at the time, had arranged for the nomination of Warren Harding as president. And so they sort of felt they did their job. They left before the convention was over and took the train back to Washington, D.C. Okay, next slide then. What they missed was the nomination of the vice president, but they had arranged that the vice president was going to be Senator Irving Linroot of Wisconsin. But during the nominating of Linroot, an Oregon delegate, Camant, climbed up on a chair and started chanting, "Coolidge, Coolidge, Coolidge." And by the time the thing was over, the convention had nominated Calvin Coolidge as vice president based on his work in Boston. And they then, nominated Coolidge. When Harding died, Coolidge became president. So 4 years later, when he was running, he decided to sort of give Oregon the honor of doing one of the seconding speeches. Well, the story of that is even a little bit deeper because Camant was a lawyer in Portland, and he was nominated by Coolidge to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He did this when the Senate was not in session. It's a recess appointment, and so he gets to serve until the Senate actually comes back into session. When the Senate did come back into session, they rejected the nomination. And I think it is still to this day the only presidential appointment where the person served but was not then confirmed by the Senate. Okay, next. I was in the Peace Corps in Colombia, and Colombia is the real site of El Dorado. Until possibly the last century, El Dorado was still maybe considered a mythical place because the Indians, when they discovered the Spaniards were looking for gold, basically said, "Oh, it's not here, it's over there," and pointed to the other side of the mountain to get rid of them because the Spaniards were very impolite, let's say, in their search for gold and taking it from the Indians. So El Dorado is something connected to Colombia, connected to my Peace Corps time. And the story of El Dorado is that there was a king who was on a raft covered in gold dust, and he then jumped into the lake as a sort of immersion and ceremony to sanctify both him and his service. El Dorados, there are several El Dorados in the world. And in fact, part of this came from an exhibit that I had called The Search for El Dorado, which was sent to a show that I was not able to attend. The written critique came back, and the judge objected to some of my postmarks from the United States of El Dorado. And the complaint was, what is El Dorado? Why are these US covers in there? El Dorado is a Latin American thing. Well, there are, as a matter of fact, El Dorados in Australia, 2 of them in Canada, and one of them in Zimbabwe. So you've got a stamp with an El Dorado cancel, actually El Dorado mine from Zimbabwe, and a cover from El Dorado, Victoria in Australia. In the US, there are more than 30 El Dorados, or have been at one time. A lot of them are DPOs. But one of them is El Dorado, Illinois. And El Dorado, Illinois is interesting because it is the only El Dorado that wasn't named after El Dorado, or at least after the mythical city. It was named after the founders of the town, a Mr. Drawing a blank on the name, a Mr. Elder and a Mr. Reed. And so the two founders decided to put their names together, and the town was known as Elder Reed. Well, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, when the railroad came through, the sign painter for the railroad thought, oh, these people don't know how to spell El Dorado. So he painted the town name for the station El Dorado. And they liked it so much, it has stayed the same ever since. But El Dorado, Illinois is interesting even for another reason. There's a story behind the El Dorado, Illinois. El Dorado was actually the first appearance of a beetle in the United States. This was before the Beatles appeared in the Ed Sullivan Show. And George Harrison was actually visiting a sister and went to a dance in El Dorado and ended up playing. And so this is a beetle. So the next slide will actually show some of these things. So you've got the town plaque, which tells the story about the railroad. You've got a postcard with the railroad. You've got the Beatles in there. So lots behind a cover, interesting stories. And I'm sure that each of you probably have a cover somewhere. If you look at, you're going to find lots of interesting things behind it. And the search is fun. Next, please. Another cover I bought because of the cancel, but also because of the half-cent stamps, for no good reason other than I just wanted it. Pompey's Pillar, Montana, which I had never heard of. Well, actually, since I bought the cover on one trip from the area, I stopped at Pompey's Pillar. Pompey's Pillar was actually named by William Clark, and it was named after Sacagawea's son, who they called Little Pomp. Okay, next. So like I say, I had the particular interest in half. And so I have a collection, a fun exhibit of half an exhibit. But there is a story behind each one of those four covers. The first one with the 3 half-cent stamps, the Nathan Hale stamp, was to be only temporary. It was when a third-class rate was raised from 1 cent to 1.5 cents, and it was to be used to make up for that. Unfortunately, the mailers decided they got more attention by putting 3 half-cent stamps on it than a 1 plus a half. And so they continued to ask the stamp. The post office said, no, we're not going to print them anymore. They complained to their politicians. The politicians then convinced the post office to continue to issue the Nathan Hale stamp. The Bermuda cover down below is a scarcity of stamps that they needed a half-cent value, so it was locally overprinted. The halfway tree Jamaica cover, of course, is one of those that brought, or at least was dutiable, and decided after that they needed to collect 10 cents postage due. The bottom one is the last day that a half-cent could be used anywhere in the world to actually deliver a cover. Next. Well, if you've got half, you need to have the other half. So if you will look at those stamps, there is a 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, 8.5. The 9.5 is a meter on the cover. 10.5, 11.5, 12.5, 13.5. I have not yet found a 14.5, 16.5, 17.5. I cheated on the 18.5. You probably can't read it because it's small, but it's actually 18 3/4. 19.5, 20.5. Then they start jumping. So you've got 22.5 and so on. But, just sort of a fun things to do. And it keeps you looking at covers, but it also keeps me interested in stamps throughout the whole world, even though I have only now limited my quote album collection to 6 countries. Okay, next, please. With math, and I'm a retired teacher. Math is one of the things that I taught. So, I was once asked by my wife, why didn't I do something simple as an exhibit? So I did a math quiz example. So you've got a Uruguay stamp of a 57, and then I subtracted a Colombian stamp of a 1, and the answer was on the cover of 56, and it was some of those fancy cancels that were made by postmasters in the 1930s from 56 Arkansas. Or to do the same thing using fractions, and you've got 4 stamps, and if you total them up, and by the way, in the exhibit itself, the covers were on a different page. So I was trying to encourage the people to do the math in their head and then look at the bottom row of the exhibit for the answers. Okay, next. Stamp spoofs. There are lots of things, sometimes local posts, sometimes Cinderellas, sometimes advertising where they are sort of stamp lookalikes or are intended to be maybe stamp lookalikes. The block of 4 in the lower left is from Mrs. Stewart's bluing, and she took the U.S., well, not she, but anyway, her company took the U.S. stamps that were for the statehood of Washington, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and made them look like they were clothes that were hung on a line to dry, and they were now all white to show that they could bleach things correctly. The upper right-hand cover is a takeoff on the Americana series, where if you'll remember, you had a curve on the stamp, and if you put the 4 blocks together, then it formed a frame around the stamps. The Dung Dung Island stamp was done by Leonard Holmstein, a collector in California, and that was actually a fantasy, but he did a wonderful exhibit on Dung Dung, including, among other things, a Lost Amelia Earhart cover and so on. Mentioned in philatelic literature, but mentioned we don't know anything about it, were the 2 black stamps on red for Van Diemen's Land, which was a play off of Van Diemen's Land, which was the older name for I'm drawing a blank. The island south of Australia, Tasmania. The other cover up, or the other stamp up on the top, went through the mail, has a Seattle, Washington postmark, but I have not yet been able to discover anything about what that stamp represents, but it is a play off of US stamps at the time. Okay, next one. The comic strips, Pogo, had a set of Poos stamps, which were guaranteed to be absolutely worthless. The Wilkinsonburg Stamp Club in Pennsylvania did a series of souvenir sheets every year for their stamp show, and one of them, missing transportation stamp, was the pogo stick. The other two are covers and designs that were done by Coulter, who was an artist for the Western Stamp Collector in Albany, Oregon, and he did a series of these. There are actually about 40 of town names, and sold them as promotion. So they were basically sold at cost. But many collectors then used them and sent them off to the real town to be postmarked. And for Cinderella collectors, it's one of the things that I guess has gotten, for US Cinderella, has gotten people very, very interested, very excited. Okay, next. The two souvenir sheets that are on the left from Columbia, but when I saw the sheets, I was absolutely fascinated why you have this sheet that is perforated 3 stamps wide, 8 stamps high, but there's only 22 stamps on it. So you've got 2 blank stamps on there. And that fascinated me. Then actually, when you go to another value, you will find that it is the same thing. It is perforated for 24 stamps, but there are really only 18 stamps on there. So this is an exhibit, one of those series exhibits that I've done, but started out sort of on a whim because of what is this, what are these missing stamps for? I have since found the decree and gotten a copy of the decree that authorized these stamps. Absolutely no explanation about why the number of stamps were chosen. But as we'll see in the next slide, we have some idea why there are blank stamps. Because the entire set was printed on one sheet. And so since if you take the number of stamps that were there and multiply it by the 50,000 sheets that were printed, you get the number of stamps that were authorized. Now, why they didn't authorize another few stamps to be able to print and use the entire paper, I do not know. But anyway, something that is interesting, and there is a story behind it, which I still don't know. Next, please.
Larry, about
Yes.
15 minutes.
Yeah, well, this is the next to the last slide.
Okay.
The colors of vermeil. These are vermeil medals or ribbons that I have won at various stamp shows. And we all know that nobody knows what color vermeil is. So that you've got them ranging the series, which I think is fun. And then the last slide is the one where I'm using that cover. It was around an exhibit. It's called an exhibit around the world in 80 covers. And so I took a cover, and you'll see on the title page there, it was a cover from London, England, which is where actually in the story Around the World in 80 Days, written by Jules Verne, where the traveler started. And it was mailed to South Africa, but it was actually forwarded to Egypt. Well, the next cover then on page 2 was Egypt to Kenya, which was my cover of the boy fishing or with fish. Then from Kenya was a cover to Mexico. From Mexico was a cover to Norway. From Norway was a cover to Japan. And throughout the exhibit, there are 80 covers. The last one comes back to London. And this was an exhibit that I showed in Milwaukee, but was not able to attend. And Janet Klug was the judge of that. She wrote maybe 500 words on her evaluation of it. But she started out by saying, I know this exhibit and this collection was a lot of fun. And of course it was. So there are lots of things that you can do are fun. And if we've got questions or comments, I'm ready to take those now, Lisa.
You're muted, Lisa.
Okay, over on the chat, Steve Brandt has put on, you might be interested in exploring stamps on YouTube. These interesting videos are presented by South African Graham Beck. Log on to youtube.com and type exploring stamps in the search box, and he thought everybody might be interested to check that out.
Great.
Anybody else want to comment
Or have stories.
have a story? Yeah.
Yeah, Larry, your covers that went to multiple places as they try to track somebody down. I've got a couple of those in my World War II military stuff. I think the guy must have been at every APO in the territory because it seemed to follow him all the way around. I need to figure out a way to put that into the exhibit that doesn't look like I'm just making fun of something.
David.
Yes, Larry, I wanted to tell you, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. But I wanted to say to everyone that I was at WestPEX a couple of years ago when Larry presented his covers around the world, 80 covers around the world. And it was a marvelous exhibit, show you did, that presentation you made. And there are some fantastic covers there. I just wanted to thank you so much.
Jane.
Well, and let me add, since you brought it up, David, one of the covers around the world is, and of course they were from country to country, was to Madrid, and it was a lighter than air, a Zeppelin cover. And one of the things I found out was that the Zeppelin did not land in Madrid, but that they lowered by rope the mail down and then brought back up the mail from Madrid. So stories behind all sorts of things that make it interesting and fun.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jane.
I just wanted to mention, after the mention of Graham Beck, the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada is doing stamp talks each month, and tomorrow night, Monday night, Graham Beck is actually the speaker. If anybody wanted to join in, you don't have to be a member of the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, but you can find out about those and register for them on the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada's website. And we also have stamp panels, which are more of a discussion that are aimed at newer collectors.
Jane, could you post the link for the Royal Philatelic Society website in the chat, please?
I can do that.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to make any comments or share a story?
I just want to say thanks, Larry. That was great. That was fun.
Well, you're very welcome. Do some fun things yourself and bring them back to us.
I got another fun one I need that I need to figure out exactly how to treat. It's again one of my World War II covers. It was canceled in the Aleutians at ADAC, but for some reason the interesting thing on it is a fake. I know somebody stuck an RF overprint on the transport stamp that was on it, which, if anybody knows, the RF overprints were for French Navy officers. And so it's a fairly obvious fake. First off, the cover was sent by an enlisted man. Secondly, it was sent from ADAC. So I don't see how a French officer would have been in ADAC. Thirdly, they were applied, when the envelope was turned in, they weren't overprinted and handed out to people. So somebody, for some reason, decided to improve this cover at some point by adding an overprint. And I need to figure out how to tell. I need to find a good way to tell that story within things, because it's just kind of, I think it's kind of cute that somebody thought that was a good idea.
But it's stories like that that really at least keep me going and keep me looking and realizing at a stamp show, any cover may have a story behind it. And search is part of the game. Both search for information as well as search for the cover.
Anyone else want to jump in? Okay, Larry, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you everybody for coming and joining us, and hope to see you in another room. Oh, wait, Paul? Oh, were you clapping? He was clapping his hands. Sorry.
I was clapping.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. We
Well,
appreciate
thank you. It was fun.
Yes, it was. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good afternoon.